The IV was still in my arm when Owen walked through the door in his good coat, the charcoal one I had dry cleaned for him every winter for 11 years, and told me he wanted a divorce. Not with tears. Not with guilt. With a briefcase, a calm voice, and our daughter-in-law Petra standing just behind him in a cream blazer, like she was there to witness a business transaction. Which, as I would come to understand, she was. I had just come out of a 6-hour surgery. I had just given a piece of myself, a physical, irreplaceable piece, to save his mother's life. The anesthetic hadn't fully cleared. My right side felt like something had been excavated from it, because it had. And Owen Calloway set a thick envelope on the tray table beside my water cup, nudged it toward me with 2 fingers, and said, "I'd like this handled before you're discharged." His mother Iris was in the room. She was seated in the chair by the window, looking steadier than any woman who had allegedly just received a transplanted organ had any right to look. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The expression on her face said everything she'd spent 11 years saying to me with smiles so thin they barely qualified. I looked at Owen. I waited for something human to cross his face, something that recognized what I had just done, what I had agreed to, what I had lain on a table and been opened up for. There was nothing. I am Miriam Calloway. I was 53 years old that morning. I was a retired dental hygienist, a mother of 1 grown son, a woman who had spent more than a decade trying to fit herself into a family that had decided before I arrived that I would never belong. And I had absolutely no idea that the transplant coordinator standing just outside that door was about to walk in and change everything. I need you to understand who I was before Owen, because who I was makes what came after feel so much heavier. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, the kind of city where the winters are long and the people are blunt, and you learn early that no one is going to hand you anything. My mother worked the front desk at a physiotherapy clinic for 30 years. My father drove supply trucks north of the city until his back gave out. They were good people, practical people. They taught me that you showed up, you did the work, and you didn't ask for more than your share. I married the first time at 26, briefly and badly, to a man who turned out to prefer someone else's company to mine. We had our son Elliot before it fell apart. I raised Elliot mostly on my own, with my mother's help, in a semi-detached in Sudbury's East End. I worked full-time and kept the house, and helped Elliot with his homework at the kitchen table, under a lamp that flickered when the heat came on. It was a small life, but it was mine, and I had built it with my own hands. I met Owen when Elliot was 16. Owen was a corporate accountant from Oakville, a widower with 1 adult daughter from his first marriage. He was measured and considerate, and he listened to me in a way that men rarely had. He called when he said he would. He asked about Elliot by name. He remembered the little things. That I took my coffee with oat milk. That I couldn't sleep with the television on. That November was hard for me, because my father had passed in November. Looking back, I understand that remembering things is not the same as caring about them. He was a careful man, careful in the way that someone is careful when they are building something that needs to hold weight for a specific period of time. We married 3 years after we met, in a small ceremony at a winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Owen's mother Iris attended. She wore a gray dress that matched her expression, and she shook my hand at the reception instead of embracing me and said, "I hope you know what you're taking on." I thought she meant Owen's long hours, his occasional coldness, the particular way he could go quiet for days when he was stressed. I smiled and said I did. I didn't know she was talking about something else entirely. Iris Calloway was 81 years old. She had run the administrative side of a commercial real estate firm for 40 years before her son took it over, and she had never fully stopped running things. She had opinions about how the house should be kept, and how money should be spent, and which of Owen's friends were worth his time. She had opinions about me that she delivered with great efficiency through the years we shared the same family dinners and holiday tables. She found my background insufficient. She found my Sudbury vowels amusing. She once at Easter referred to the way I'd arranged the table as very practical, and from her mouth that word was not a compliment. Owen always explained her away. "She's from a different generation," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." I believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative, that he agreed with her and simply found me useful, was too bleak to sit with. 2 years into the marriage, Iris's kidneys began to fail. It wasn't sudden. It was the kind of decline that happens in stages, each one announced by a doctor in a beige office with a chart and a careful voice. She went from stage 2 to stage 4 in 14 months. She was placed on the transplant registry in Ontario. But her blood type was uncommon and the wait list was long. Owen came to me one evening in the kitchen, where I was finishing the dishes, and he sat down at the table, and he looked at me in the way he had when we were first together, open and tired, and asking. "The specialist thinks family members should be screened," he said. "Even spouses in some cases, depending on compatibility factors. You'd be considered immediate family at this point." He paused. "I know it's a lot to ask." I didn't even hesitate. I said yes. Because that is what you do when someone needs help. That is what my mother would have done. That is the kind of person I had spent my whole life trying to be. The screening came back. I was a match. Owen held me in the kitchen that night for a long time and he told me he didn't have the words. He told me our life together was going to mean something. He told me he would spend the rest of however long he had left making sure I knew how much I had given him. I believed him. I had no reason not to. I went into surgery on a Tuesday in October. Elliot drove down from Sudbury the night before and sat with me in the pre-op room until they told him he had to wait outside. He held my hand and he said, "Mom, you don't have to do this." And I told him I knew that, and I told him that was exactly why I was doing it. I woke up in the wrong room. Owen had arranged for a private recovery room on the 4th floor. The kind with the adjustable lighting, and the quiet nurses, and the window that looked out over a courtyard with a few stubborn maples, still holding their leaves into October. What I woke up in was something else. A side room off a corridor, smaller. The kind of space that had been pressed into service as additional recovery capacity. The window faced a ventilation unit. The call button panel had a crack running through the corner of it. The blanket smelled clean, but the ceiling tiles had the soft yellow discoloration of age. My right side felt like I had been compressed and then released, and something had not come back to its original shape. I reached for the cup of water on the tray. My arm shook and I spilled half of it, and I lay there and watched the puddle on the tray table, and I told myself Owen was just delayed. I told myself he was probably with his mother, making sure the surgery had gone smoothly, making sure she was settled and comfortable and coming around properly. I told myself that for 40 minutes, and then the door opened. Owen came in first, good coat, briefcase, the careful expression he used for difficult conversations. Behind him was Iris. In a wheelchair, yes, but upright and sharp-eyed, and wrapped in the cashmere shawls she'd brought in her hospital bag, looking considerably less like someone who had undergone major surgery than I had expected. And behind Iris, close enough that they were nearly sharing the doorway, was a woman named Claire. I knew Claire Ashford. She worked in the leasing division of Owen's firm. She was, perhaps 45, composed in the way of women who have decided exactly what they want, and she had been at 2 of the firm's holiday parties that I had attended, and smiled at me both times, with the specific warmth of someone who knows something you don't. She was wearing a winter white coat I didn't recognize and a ring I had never seen before on her left hand. "Owen." My voice came out thin and roughed at the edges. "How is your mother? Did the surgery go well?" He crossed to the tray table and set the envelope down. Not beside the water cup, on top of it, directly in front of me, close enough that when he let go of it, the edge of it caught my right side. Not heavily, but enough. Enough that I made a sound without meaning to and my hands went to the spot. "These are divorce papers," he said. "My copy is already signed. I need yours." I stared at the envelope. Then I looked up at him. His face was the same face he used at client meetings when he had already made a decision and was waiting for the other party to catch up. "I just came out of surgery," I said. "I just gave your mother my—" "We're aware of what you gave," Iris said from the doorway. Her voice was dry as paper. And it was appreciated, in the functional sense. Something about that phrase, in the functional sense, reached me in a way the envelope hadn't yet. It was too precise. It was the kind of language people use when they've rehearsed. "I don't understand what's happening," I said. Even as I said it, I could feel that I did understand. I just couldn't make myself go there yet. "I married you because you were the right fit for what our family needed," Owen said. He said it the way he said everything. Evenly, without ornament. "My mother's condition required a living donor. Donors don't come forward easily for someone of her age and blood type. You were compatible. You were also in a position where a committed relationship was something you wanted very much. You were available to be persuaded. He paused. I want to be honest with you about that because I think you deserve honesty at this stage. I almost laughed. I think I did laugh, a short, airless sound. You married me to harvest my kidney, I said. I married you because it was the most reliable path to what was needed. The connection was real in its own way. I wasn't performing all of it. He said this as though it were a concession, a kindness. Claire moved slightly beside him. Just enough to let the winter light catch the ring. We've been together for 3 years, she said. Her voice was calm and not unkind. The way a person sounds when they've already processed their guilt and decided it was manageable. The plan was always to formalize things once this situation was resolved. I looked at her ring. I looked at Iris's composed face. I looked at Owen, and I felt something happen inside me that was very quiet and very final. Not falling apart. Something closing, actually. A door shutting on a room I had built and furnished and heated for 11 years. Owen reached into his briefcase and produced a second document. A check, already made out, folded once. He set it on the tray. $80,000. The divorce agreement is clean, he said. You relinquish any claim to marital property in exchange for this settlement, given that the house is held under a family trust, and the firm is structured accordingly. A court proceeding would be long and inconclusive. This is more than a court would likely award you. He said it like he was explaining a budget variance. Sign today and the transfer goes through within a week. And if I don't? Then we proceed through the courts. He picked up his briefcase, which will be slow and expensive and, frankly, public in ways I don't think benefit either of us. Iris made a small sound from her wheelchair, something between a sigh and a confirmation. Claire studied the window. Owen looked at me one more time from the doorway with the expression of a man who had already mentally filed this folder and moved on. Thank you, Miriam, he said. I mean that. This was a significant thing you did. Then they left. And I was alone in the wrong room with a check I didn't ask for and divorce papers and the sound of the ventilation unit outside my window. And the slow grinding understanding that I had not been loved. I had been recruited. I didn't cry yet. I was too deep in shock for that. I lay and stared at the ceiling tiles and breathed through the tightness in my right side, and I tried to build a timeline in my head. When had this started? How far back did the planning go? Who else had known? And the further back I tried to go, the more the ground kept disappearing under my feet. The door opened again. I tensed. But the woman who stepped in was not Owen or Iris or Claire. She was wearing hospital ID and dark blue scrubs, and she had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who spend professional lives carrying difficult information carefully. Mrs. Calloway, she said. I'm Denise Ford. I'm the living donor coordinator for the transplant program. I was part of the team this morning. She pulled the chair from the wall and sat down, which I had already learned to read as a signal. Sitting down meant this was not brief. I need to speak with you about something that came to our attention during the procedure. I want you to hear it directly from me before you have any further conversations with the Calloway family. I said. Tell me. Denise S. Ford folded her hands. Our surgical team runs a final cross-match verification before every living donor transplant. It's standard protocol, a last confirmation of compatibility at the antibody level, not just the blood typing and initial HLA screening. She paused. This morning's verification returned results that were inconsistent with the compatibility documentation submitted to our program. What does that mean? It means that the compatibility testing results on files, the ones that indicated Iris Calloway as a suitable recipient for your kidney, did not match what our lab found when we ran the cross-match this morning. The room was very quiet. She wasn't a match, I said. The final cross-match indicated significant antibody incompatibility, Denise said carefully, which means proceeding with the transplant to Iris Calloway would have carried a very high risk of hyperacute rejection. The surgical team made the decision to redirect the organ. She held my gaze. Your kidney was transplanted this morning to a 67-year-old man named Theodore Brandt. He has been on the Ontario waitlist for 4 years. He was the next verified compatible recipient. As of 2 hours ago, his body is accepting the organ without complication. I lay there and let that land. The documents were falsified, I said. It wasn't a question. The discrepancy between the submitted testing data and our own lab results is significant enough that our program director has already contacted Health Canada and the Canadian Blood Services Oversight Body. There will be an investigation. She paused. Under the Human Tissue Gift Act and federal health regulations, manipulation of donor compatibility documentation is a serious criminal matter. The individuals responsible face significant legal consequences. I looked at the check on my tray, $80,000 that Owen had brought in a briefcase to a hospital room, to a woman still on IV fluids, to seal away something he hadn't yet realized had already come apart. Is he going to be all right? I asked. Theodore. Denise's face changed. Just slightly, but I caught it. The specific softening of a person who deals in hard news and is relieved to deliver something else. His family has been notified. His daughter was with him this morning. He has been waiting a very long time. She paused as, "What you gave this morning, Mrs. Calloway, whatever the circumstances around it, went to someone who needed it very badly. That's real. That doesn't go away." Something moved through my chest that had nothing to do with the surgical wound and everything to do with the fact that I had done something true even inside something false. "Where is the Calloway family now?" I asked. "Mr. Calloway and his mother are still in the building. Iris Calloway is being held for additional consultation, given the complications with her file. The transplant program has a legal obligation to hold the involved parties while the investigation is initiated." I looked at the divorce papers. I looked at the check. I looked at the cracked corner of the call button panel. "I need to make a phone call," I said. Her name was Gwen Adichie, and she had been my closest friend since we worked together at the same dental practice in Sudbury in our late 20s. She had moved to Toronto 12 years ago, and for those 12 years had worked as a family law lawyer, with a practice on St. Clair West that handled, among other things, cases of matrimonial fraud and coerced asset agreements. I had not called her nearly often enough since marrying Owen. He had never been hostile toward my friendships. Just consistently, quietly, logistically discouraging in the way that people are when they need you, accessible and unfortified. She picked up on the third ring. I told her I was at the hospital. I told her I was post-surgery. I told her there were divorce papers on my tray, and a check for $80,000, and a transplant coordinator who had just used the phrase falsified documentation, in a room where I was still on IV fluids. She said two things. First, "Do not touch that check." Second, "I'll be there in under an hour." She was there in 50 minutes, in her court blazer carrying a leather portfolio, with the specific energy of someone who had been quietly waiting for permission to move. She stepped into that small side room and looked at me, and looked at the tray table, and her expression went very still, in the way of someone who is angry but has learned to be useful before being angry. "Tell me all of it," she said. "From the beginning," I told her. She didn't interrupt. She took notes with the focus of someone building a structure, not just recording information. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Let me make sure I have this correctly. He identified you as a potential donor before the relationship began. He pursued you specifically because of your compatibility profile and your personal circumstances. Recently single, no immediate family in the city, looking for a long-term relationship. He married you under false pretenses with no intention of maintaining the marriage beyond the point at which the donation occurred. The compatibility documentation submitted to the transplant program was falsified, which means the fraud was not only personal but medical, and potentially criminal under federal health law. And he then presented you with a settlement offer while you were in post-operative recovery, before you had access to legal counsel, and before you had any idea the organ hadn't even gone to the intended recipient." "Yes," I said. Gwen looked at the check for a long moment. "He wanted this sealed before you understood what you had." She put her portfolio on the edge of the tray. "The federal investigation is already running. I can't touch that piece, and I don't need to. Health Canada and the Oversight Board are going to be far more effective than anything civil could be. What I'm going to focus on is this." She gestured at the divorce papers. "Owen Calloway holds 26% ownership of Calloway Commercial Properties, a firm currently valued at approximately $2.4 million in assets. The marriage lasted 11 years and you maintained the role of spouse throughout. Socially, practically, economically, You left a full-time position when you married him and relocated from Sudbury. A marriage entered under demonstrably false pretenses is grounds for annulment or fraud-based dissolution, which carries different asset implications than a standard divorce. I don't want his money, I said. I was surprised again by how completely I meant it. Gwen studied me. Then what do you want? I thought about Theodore Brandt, 67 years old, who had waited 4 years on a list and whose daughter had been with him that morning. I thought about Owen's voice in the kitchen 2 years ago, asking me to consider being tested, framing it as a question when it was already a plan. I thought about Iris in her cashmere shawl looking at me like I was a ledger entry that had finally been closed. I want it public, I said. I want all of it in the light. Whatever they did and how they did it, and how long they were planning it. Gwen closed her portfolio. Then let's go make sure they don't get out of this building with the story they came in with. Owen was in the family consultation lounge on the second floor, standing near the window with his phone in his hand, when Gwen and I came around the corner. Me in a hospital gown, IV line still in my arm moving carefully. Gwen 2 steps ahead with the particular forward momentum of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how it ends. He saw us and his composure did something I had never seen it do in 11 years. It didn't break, but it shifted. Something recalculated behind his eyes. Claire was seated on the far end of the lounge seating. Iris's wheelchair was near the interior hallway. Miriam. Owen's voice was measured. You should be resting. I probably should be, I agreed. Gwen stepped forward and introduced herself, and handed Owen a document she had prepared on her phone and printed at the nursing station. A notice of intent to file for fraud-based marriage dissolution, civil damages and full matrimonial asset disclosure in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, Family Division. She told him that the federal investigation into the falsification of transplant compatibility documentation was already underway. That Health Canada had been notified, that the Canadian Blood Services Oversight Body had been contacted, and that the transplant program's legal team was cooperating fully. She said all of this in the same tone a person uses to read a grocery list. Owen's jaw tightened. He looked at the document. He looked at me. The settlement offer was more than reasonable, he said. The warmth was gone from his voice entirely now, just the mechanism underneath. You presented a settlement to a woman in post-operative recovery before she had legal counsel, Gwen said. In Ontario, that alone raises serious questions about coercion and informed consent in the context of a legal agreement. We're not interested in settling. We're interested in full disclosure and a complete account of the planning and execution of this arrangement. Iris spoke from her wheelchair sharply. She signed consent forms. The donation was voluntary. Consent obtained through systematic deception is not valid consent under Canadian law, Gwen said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And a marriage contracted specifically to access a non-consenting organ donor, using falsified medical documentation, is not something that will be easy to characterize as acting in good faith, particularly in front of a jury. Jury. The word did exactly what Gwen had meant it to do. I watched Owen look at Claire. I watched Claire look at the floor. I watched Iris's hands tighten on the arms of the wheelchair. A woman in a gray blazer appeared at the end of the corridor. Hospital administration, as it turned out, accompanied by 2 security staff and a man I would later learn was the transplant program's legal liaison. They approached Owen with the deliberate courtesy of people who have a job to do, and would prefer to do it without incident. Owen looked at me one more time. The boardroom face was completely gone. What was underneath it was not what I had expected. Not guilt, not remorse, but the very particular expression of someone who has run a careful calculation for a long time, and is now watching it come apart, and is already trying to figure out what comes next. Even now, even here, Miriam, he said quietly, reaching for the register of the man I had married. We could still talk about this. We are talking about it, I said. This is the conversation. He went with the legal liaison. Iris was directed to a separate consultation room. Claire stood alone for a moment in the lounge, the winter white coat looking less like elegance and more like something chosen for a role that had just ended. Then she walked toward the elevator without looking at anyone. Gwen put her hand briefly on my arm. Come on, you need to sit down. I know, I said. But I stayed for another moment in that corridor. and I let myself look at the space where all of it had just come apart. And I breathed through the tightness in my right side, and I noticed that underneath the pain and the shock and the exhaustion there was something else. Something I hadn't felt clearly in a very long time. Not triumph. Nothing as loud as that. More like the feeling of finally standing on solid ground after years of not realizing the floor had been slightly tilted. The Health Canada investigation was formally opened within the week. The documentation submitted to the transplant program was examined by federal forensic auditors and confirmed to have been altered. The original compatibility screening, run by an independent lab the Callaways had privately engaged, had showed significant incompatibility between my tissue and irises. The forged documents submitted to the hospital had been prepared by a medical consultant, whose license the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario suspended within 30 days of the investigation's opening. Owen and Iris were charged under the Federal Assisted Human Reproduction Act and relevant provisions of the Criminal Code relating to fraud and the falsification of medical records. The proceedings were not quick, but they were thorough. Canadian courts are deliberate. Gwen told me early on to make my peace with the timeline, and I did. The civil case moved in parallel. Gwen's discovery process turned up email correspondence between Owen and a private investigator dating back 14 months, before he approached me at that hospital fundraiser in Sudbury. Correspondence that included my name, my blood type, my family situation, my approximate financial circumstances, and a summary of my psychological profile compiled from public records and social media. He had been building a file on me before we ever met. The question he asked at those hospital windows, "Are you hiding too?" had been prepared. Everything had been prepared. The jury deliberations took less than a day. I did not take pleasure in the outcome the way I might have expected. What I felt was quieter than pleasure. More like a bill being settled. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like the particular relief of something that had been wrong being made, in the imperfect way that courts can manage, somewhat more right. Theodore Brandt sent a card to the hospital 6 weeks after the surgery. The nursing coordinator forwarded it to Gwen, who passed it along to me. It was a plain card, the kind you find in a pharmacy, and inside it Theodore had written in the careful handwriting of someone who doesn't write many cards. "I don't know your circumstances, I don't know what brought you to that table, but I'm still here because of it. My daughter wanted me to say thank you. So does she, I think. She's too young to write it yet, but she will." He had a granddaughter, 8 months old. He'd included a photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly smudged at one corner. A man in a hospital chair holding a baby with a great deal of dark hair. Both of them looking at the camera with the bewildered happiness of people who have just realized something good. I kept the photograph. I put it on the windowsill of the apartment I rented in the East End of Toronto, after I left the house in Oakville. A small apartment. Nothing like the house, but it was mine in a way the house had never quite been. I could see a piece of the lake from the kitchen window on clear days. Elliot came down from Sudbury for the first weekend and helped me put the furniture together, and we ate takeout Thai food on the floor, because the table wasn't assembled yet, and he said, "Mom, I'm really sorry I didn't." And I stopped him. I said, "You couldn't have seen it. I was inside it and I couldn't see it." And that was true, and we both knew it. And we ate our food on the floor, and he stayed the whole weekend. I want to tell you where I am now because I think that part matters as much as any of it. I went back to work. Not hygiene. My right side has restrictions now that make certain things difficult. But I took a part-time position with a donor advocacy organization, based in Hamilton, that works with the provincial government, on policy around living organ donation, specifically around the legal protections that exist. And the ones that don't. For living donors in Ontario, there are gaps. There are places where the system trusted that people would act in good faith, and did not build in enough protection for the possibility that they wouldn't. I know exactly where those gaps are. I have been inside them. I am not fixed. I want to be honest about that. There are still moments when I am doing something ordinary. Making coffee. Driving on the 400. Sitting in a waiting room. And something shifts, and I am back in that side room, looking at a check and a pair of divorce papers, and 11 years of a marriage that was built around what I could be persuaded to give up. The anger comes and goes. The grief comes and goes. The bewilderment honestly comes and goes too. Because even now there are mornings when some part of me still doesn't quite believe that a person can do that, can plan that, can sit across a dinner table from someone for 11 years and see only what they're useful for. But here is what I also know. Theodore Brandt is still here. His granddaughter is growing. A man who had run out of time got more of it, because of something that came out of me. The people who thought they could use me and pay me off, and leave me in a side room with a cracked call button to figure it out alone. They found out that I was harder to leave behind than they had planned for. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether someone could engineer an entire relationship around what they needed from you, wearing the face of something real, I am not going to tell you it's impossible. I am going to tell you that it is survivable, and that what you are made of does not change, based on what someone else decided you were worth.